All right, guests, we want to put you through another hour, but I hope it won't be too torturous because we've already heard about lots of exciting things. Now, at the end of the day, we want to talk about what needs to be done. That's what Lenin talked about as well. But today, we really want to see what we have learned or can learn from all the initiatives we've heard about. We've now representatives, federal authorities, municipal authorities. We don't have a representative of the regional level, but let's say let's do a quick introduction round. And then we'll go through the first talk round. The question is, what needs to be done now in order to tackle the problem? Hello, I'm Peter Zels. I work for the Federal Ministry of Health. I'm responsible for drugs and addiction, and I am responsible particularly for pilot projects. Frank Woike, I am at the city of Hanover. Claudia Hack, I am member of the board of an association for ex-users and junkies. I'm Aline Dickel, Drogenhilfe Dortmund, and I basically work in street work. It's now called environmental management, but it's really street work. Now we also have social space runner, as it's called. So, I mean, there are new terms for old roles. Okay, let's start with our federal representative. We've just heard from Frank that there are lots of projects that are being prepared. What can the federal government do to help those projects? Well, first of all, thank you very much for your update. We are also waiting to see how things are now evolving. But I recognize what the barriers are, and I think it's absolutely fantastic that you're not to be deterred, and I'm sure that you will be successful in the end. What can we do as a federal agency? Well, you've already mentioned it. We can really support the evaluation. At the federal level, we have only limited options. There are some model projects. Well, we can support the analysis. We can co-finance an event like this one here. That is in our interest, and that's something we can support. But generally, it's really within the area of responsibility of the municipalities and the regions. But you can be absolutely sure that, yes, the federal department will support you. Yes, that's out of, there's no doubt. But there is a systemic question. We heard that also in Frankfurt. About half the people who live in the area around the central railway station in Frankfurt are not from Frankfurt. And in Hanover, we also have this knee-jerk reaction. If those people are near the central railway station, then they are your people, and the city needs to put in financial resources. But my understanding is we need federal participation and regional participation because we can't say, look, you're not from Hanover, and yet we have to provide the financial resources. And that means that a lot of people come from elsewhere to Hanover. Not just because the drug market is more fluid and more flexible, no, but also your provision, your service provision is much better compared to other municipalities or federal regions. And that is very difficult for us because we have to really serve everybody. And that is something that needs to be picked up by the federal government, but also by the regional governments. It is definitely a serious problem. But the ministry also asked us to describe the situation in these areas around the central railway station. It was difficult for us because we said this is the situation, but we can't really deal with all the people there. And there are many people who have no health insurance. So you have these conversations, you talk those things. The truth is, we make our contribution and we talk to the federal authorities, but they support us with words, but that's not enough, really. And maybe the federal government can then also put some pressure on the regional authorities. Yeah, and especially when it comes to reimbursing hospital costs, there are limits as to what the federal government can do. But another question, you also want to include cocaine users in studies. The number of people who misuse cocaine and are in your facilities, that proportion is much smaller. Well, it depends what you define as a target group. If you look at Frankfurt, cocaine is probably a bigger issue than crack misuse. And in the banking area, there's probably a lot of consumption there. Have I just been censured? No. But seriously, we need to define the target group. And at the moment, there's a lot of pressure on the open drug scene, mainly crack. But of course, there should also be an opportunity for us to include cocaine misusers. But in the first instance, our focus should be on crack users. Yeah, we know that also from the HIV/AIDS crisis. There was a crisis and the fear that AIDS might spread to the entire population. And that meant that all of a sudden we got resources as well. I mean, it would be tragic if the development were to be similar here. Well, at the moment, we don't know. I know people expect a lot, but a lot of the expectations require financial resources. And of course, there's also a legal framework, but I think we'll talk about that later. But we talk about peer groups, and peer groups are important for these studies because you need to really convince people in the target groups, and we need your help there because you need to persuade people to actually take part in a study like this. How do you see that? How can you convince people to take part in a study like this? Well, first of all, you have to talk to them, you have to explain to them what it's about, and it's also important to take these people seriously. These are adults. You need to ask them, and that's exactly what you did with your crack survey. What about synthetic cannabis? People quite often know what they need, but they don't get it. Many people also come to Frankfurt because the penalties in Bavaria are huge in Bavaria. A friend of mine had 200 grams hashish, and she had 2 or 3 years, a custodial sentence of 2 or 3 years in Bavaria. So that's another reason why people come to Frankfurt. So many people who live in Frankfurt or are now living in Frankfurt once lived in Bavaria. So these are homeless people in a way who now stay in Frankfurt, and you can't send them back anywhere. They're just here in Frankfurt. In Dortmund, the drug scene has changed a lot as well. I didn't realize that crack all of a sudden played an important role. So how do you do now in your street work, or as it's called now, environmental management? How can you persuade people to take part in studies? Well, in our street work, we work together with peers. We've got clients who work with us, and that works very well. Maybe to explain our role, it's called environmental management because there's a huge ecosystem around drug misuse. And it was my task to calm things down, but that was difficult because we didn't have any alternative offers. Now we've got longer opening times in drug consumption rooms from 8 to 8. That's to be welcomed. But at the end of the day, everything is centralized around one place in the city center. That's good for the users, but not so good for the residents. So the city of Dortmund has now decided that there is a certain concept framework, and there the city really agreed to a lot of proposals that we put forward, so expanded street work, for example, to further consumption sites, to decentralize a lot of things. I mean, that's always a two-edged sword, because people you want to be close to the people in the city center, but at the same time, it's difficult to find the right real estate there. But the city of Dortmund is trying a lot. We know that opposite the current drug consumption space, there is a building which we can use as an overspill. So that's not an acceptance area. No, we call it overspill area, because we've basically reached the limit of what we can do. So the idea now is there should be no micro trade, there should be no control either, but with us in street work, we should really be there, be present there with 2 people per shift. It's exciting, but primarily it's at the moment that we're really focused on one particular space, and we can't find any alternative real estate at the moment. Well, what can the federal government do? I mean, drug consumption rooms, and then we've got the Drugs Act as well. I mean, here, the federal authorities really need to act, don't they? So I have to tell you again that there are certain responsibilities. I'm not primarily responsible for the legal area, but I have to say I'm very impressed by what's happening in Switzerland. But it can't really be transferred to Germany. It might be desirable, but it would be desirable if something would happen in that way. But that would also require a change in the legislation. Yes, and you need a bit of courage as well, because the law in Switzerland is similar, isn't it? You're correct. You need courage as well. And it's also a question of political will. We talked about money. We've now got a draft budget for 24-25. So we'll only have a finalized budget in the summer or autumn 2025. Then we'll have to see where the priorities lie. And the question is whether we still have the political will then. So we still have to wait and see. So we'll have to see what other trends will emerge. Yes, but the problem is that the people who are affected can't wait and see. Yeah, I really thought the presentations were fantastic. And I have to say, in Switzerland, they simply do things. Here, people simply die. I really want some action, and I would also hope that the police and the authorities could maybe stand on the side of consumers, crack and drug consumers, and maybe they could focus on real offenders. Yeah, because there's also an offense, if you like, a criminal offense, where there's no victim. The only victim is me, myself, as a drug user or a crack consumer. So why don't we try other things? Yeah, because I was in a meeting and somebody said, well, people will only act, the police will only act, the decision makers will only act if we've if we have 4,000, 5,000 drug deaths a year. And we are already at a record high of drug deaths. So what are we waiting for? In Switzerland, they've been doing it for 30 years. Why are we waiting? What are we waiting for here in Germany? Hanover is a pioneer. Well, no, not really, because Mr. Meyer put it absolutely correctly. Everybody has got their own role, and the police have a different role compared to the addiction assistance structures. I see that in Hanover as well. The police are relatively tolerant towards micro traders, but of course, they also have their own stakeholders. They have to meet certain targets. They have to stop and search people. They have to act against organized crime. So everybody's got their own role. We support addicts. The police have a different role. And, well, these roles are not always compatible. Well, I know the situation in Frankfurt quite well. And I can see what's happening in the area around the central railway station. And people quite often take you to Frankfurt to see how the cooperation works well with the police. In the central railway station area in Frankfurt, I don't think the police are really hunting down drug users. Well, the idea of drug consumption rooms is also based on an illegal act, because I need to be in possession of heroin before I go into a drug consumption room, and that is tolerated. So why? So if we tolerate the consumption in the drug consumption space or room, why can't we also tolerate the micro trade outside? I mean, the idea that we tolerate illegal acts, that is a principle that we already have and respect. It's all correct and it's all right. That would be a logical further development. But Ms. Woike said it at the beginning, and very often the portrayal of drug users and crack users is very derogatory. And now we also have certain political trends, populism, and so on. So there's almost the expectation, when will you solve the problem? Yeah, but we, as municipalities, we can't solve the problem. We can only reduce harm. But this expectation that we must solve a problem, that is something that is an expectation that grows as a result of these populist trends. Question, unfortunately, is done without a microphone. So there are indeed professional drug peddlers. They are not users, and they're part of organized crime. They make a lot of money. And should we just say, well, let them sell their ware and we look the other way? That can't be the right approach either, can it? But now you're talking about Zurich. If I understood this correctly, I don't know how you do that in Zurich. But there are only people who are admitted who meet certain criteria. They have to be residents, and they also need proof that they are drug dependent. So it's a different situation altogether. Here in Frankfurt, we also accept people who are not from Frankfurt. The people who prepare the crack, they're of no interest to me. It's the people who use. Yes, you're right. We're approaching the issue from different angles. And my role is to make sure that people don't bring crack and cocaine into Frankfurt. Yeah, but I'm focusing on the drug users because they have to foot the bill at the end of the day. And that is, of course, something that the political decision makers have to address. So if people can consume drugs in supervised consumption rooms, why can't we also tolerate microtrade? Well, I have to say, we only admit people who are really heavily dependent. And the people that you're talking about, they're the people that the police in Zurich are also after. But we're talking about the consumers. And the drug markets are also structured in different ways. I know in Geneva, there is no such thing as microtrader. It's a certain process. So if you were to allow that, then this whole process would self-regulate itself somehow at that level. But you have to think about those things. I just wanted to add something here as well. The level that you talked about, that's something that we also have in Frankfurt. There's quite a proportion of people, I think 30% of the consumers also trade and peddle small quantities. So you could really follow the same approach as in Zurich. That's something that I would like to confirm as well. Martin Morgenstern. We do street work, and we've had lots of experience in the railway area district. We really see lots of transactions here. Most of the transactions are these micro trade transactions. These are small quantities. And that's where you see fluctuating qualities and quality as well. So one rock can be subdivided into 4 little chunks. That is something that happens among consumers. And that's also what really shapes the public perception. But the guy who actually imports, if you like, the drug, that's a completely different thing. But the small transactions that occur in the area around the central railway station, that's microtrade. And that's why I like what has just been said by my colleague. It's about the management and the control of microtrade. But at the same time, you need to pursue the police need to pursue the wholesalers. That's something that is important. What about Dortmund? You've developed a cooperation model between drug assistance and the police. Yes, we do that at different levels. We have a round table, and so there we meet the police leaders. We meet regularly once every 3 months, and for the last 3 or 4 months, we also meet once a month with those people who also work in the street. We have the public order office. We work well with the police. We feel there is a clear line. The public order office, they have a different role, so it's a bit more difficult. But in January, we had a new agreement. There had been lots of complaints and negative portrayals in the press. So that's why we then brought in emergency shelters, more drug consumption spaces, acceptance spaces. These are ideas that the city of Dortmund is currently thinking about. They're trying out different strategies, but the consensus between the political parties and different groups is now crumbling a little bit. But at the moment, a lot is happening, and the drug assistance is really well integrated. So we look for places to live for people, and that's quite good. So how can the regions be involved as well? Hanover is not just a big city, it's also the capital of the region of Lower Saxony. Yeah, but we're worlds apart almost. So the structures are not there. But the systemic question that I asked, yeah, how the costs could be shared, I would I want to put that forward once more. What about people who haven't got a health insurance? Yeah, the assumption is always people have health insurance, they go to the doctor, and then they can be treated. But we established a clearing office at the beginning a few years ago, and there we um, wanted to check whether people still had some entitlement for health treatment. But about a third of the people could be helped, but two-thirds of the people, the assessment was no, you have no recourse to health insurance and health services. And I think for those people, we need a different model. Those were the figures in Hanover, and the proportion of people who are not insured is actually growing. And that's a massive challenge for our health insurance companies. It's difficult to cover everybody that way. And that is something that needs to be tackled at the municipal, regional, and federal level as well. I, I organize and coordinate a drug addiction assistance in Berlin. So sometimes we have people who jump in if there's no health insurance. Um, in Cologne, I think it existed as well. Maybe the representative from Cologne can tell us a little bit more about that. And in Berlin, we also have a clearing office for people who don't have a health insurance, especially if there's no recourse to funds elsewhere. Then the costs can be taken over for medical treatment.
Exactly. Well, in Hamburg, we have an offering for uninsured opioid addicts, and we ensure that their work or their requirements are covered in a low threshold manner so they can access basic care. We have doctors and carers who are financed through the addiction care budget. So that is also an option in terms of funding. That means we're talking about distribution of costs again. You can't say this is one council willing to do that and loads of costs stick to it, and everyone around it would say, great, just why don't you drive into the capital or into the metropolis and leave the countryside behind because there's no funding. Well, I don't agree that everyone goes where there is offers. This is something that's been supporting me for 30 years. We've evaluated before we've offered in order to prove that people were already here. These people exist, and it shouldn't be a question where do they come from. This is where they live, this is where they spend their life, and this is where they require aid. I would like to speak about one point again, because at the moment there are many aims in terms of politics and societal order that are not being taken advantage of, and people are trying to push everything over to the addiction aid budget. Our mayor also said we should use our rights to um, block anyone who isn't from Hamburg from our facility. But then at the same time, we're supposed to solve problems in addiction aid that is completely not within our remit. How can we negotiate these situations better? Because they keep trying to lob information or tasks or responsibilities onto us, where some people are trying to avoid their own responsibilities. We can't fulfill all these jobs. We don't want to fulfill all these tasks. We don't want to reject anybody either. If someone is consuming on the street and then we can't give first aid, for example, politicians, administrators need to understand their responsibility. We need to think about redistributing. We cannot reject people. That's not possible. Yes, I just wanted to speak about that again. Often we speak about the so-called junkie jogging. Even within Cologne, let's take that as an example. We often assume that if a consumption room were to open here, then everyone from all of Cologne would drive right across the entire city and the whole drug scene would assemble there. But this has been proven in the city that this is not a sufficient incentive. If anything, there are multiple factors why people go to different cities. Like my colleague said earlier, there are many components that meet. You can't just limit it to one topic and say this is why people are coming. They use offers because they are there and appreciate it, but it's too simple to break it down like that. I have a question that I'd like to ask of Switzerland. So as a city administrator or addiction counselor, I understand the difficulty of financing and distributing funding, particularly for the target group of those who have no rights and no permission to consume any offers or are not entitled to anything. I wonder how you ensure that only those who are registered in Zurich or in Basel get the services. I'm sure there are people who have no home base at all, are not registered anywhere. So I wonder how you deal with this kind of situation. Yes, that's correct. Can you hear me? I can't hear myself. Yes, that is a point that is quite controversial because from a social worker or medical point of view, it is not sensible to reject people, but at the same time, there's also responsibility in the individual councils. Switzerland is obviously a lot smaller, so it makes it a little bit easier, but the difficulty in all cities is the same. We have 18 consumption rooms in Switzerland and 30 in Germany. And Switzerland is 10 times smaller. I think it does seem to be a system that is well established and extensive. People don't have to travel from Basel to Zurich to be able to consume. The cities still manage things differently. Basel, for example, let everyone in, anyone from Switzerland. Zurich, however, does not. But there is also no pull from Zurich to Basel at all. People stay where they live. However, with crack, a new discussion has erupted on a political level, i.e. pressure in smaller cities. These are cities with 30 to 50,000 inhabitants, and many people who have moved to Zurich have experienced a lot of issues with the neighbors, or we have issues with the neighbors, and politics have made it clear we're not going to let other people in because otherwise there's going to be a pull. And that's what's being debated now about opening new drug consumption rooms due to the crack issues. But we need to ensure that change can take place. I'm still stuck on the question of who's responsible for what. because in my professional career, it's happened too often. Maybe I keep talking to the wrong people, but it doesn't matter whether it's a flat for a member of staff, whether it's heroin or crack addict. The solution of the problem always seems to be found quite somewhere else compared to where you're sitting down with someone. If I sit down with the federal state or a city, they will say, oh, the government, the German federal government is responsible, and vice versa. Look, a part of our society has no access to substitution care. That's scandalous. Imagine if they were cancerous children with cancer. Just because addiction has such a stigma, people try to pretend it's not their issue. At least the previous management decided this is an issue that the top management needs to deal with. I've rarely managed to get through to people and have rarely found the response, how do we make sure fewer people die because of addiction? I share the previous speaker's opinion. The situation is getting tougher, but I think we need to be decisive and push against this development. I think we ought to start an initiative, and I believe the German federal government should ensure it is clear who is responsible for what, and should define what a solution might look like, and should make a contribution. It frustrates me that I'm often sitting down around a table and then I hear, oh, someone else should be here at this conversation, at this round table, because they're responsible. I don't want to punish the representative of the government here to answer that question, but I think I'd like to add that we do need to think about the psychosocial reasons why people consume substances. The image of people in the media, in the press, in the public eye, we've already got news in the ZDF in the German television, German second broadcasting channel about our conference here today. People seem to pretend that why these people consume, why would they consume such crap if they're feeling so poorly? Why didn't they seek some help? If I remember correctly, sometimes people say, I only need to be near the Frankfurt train station, and then I already smell something, and this smell sort of seems to draw me into the scene. Do you remember that? Can you describe that? Why do people consume? Because if you see the way it is depicted in the media and the public eye, it shouldn't really be happening. How can we ensure there are support structures if you are of the opinion that this shouldn't even be happening, no one should even be consuming these substances? Well, first of all, it's very interesting that you remember because it's 7 years ago that we published this study and we had a small study to produce it. But we obviously had 30 high-quality interviews, and it's quite interesting that no one's done it since. No one's carried out such a study. Might be useful. Maybe the motives have also changed. You quoted it briefly. One of the top issues, or one of the top reasons was, I can't even say why I consume. Some people started with heroin, and most of them were able to say why they started using heroin, why they thought it was good, at least at some point why they thought it was good. And then when it came to crack, well, basically, if they even managed to figure out some reason why they reckon they used it, oftentimes they talked about the kick being the thing, something reaching their brain. But where the reason is, what the reason is probably impossible to define. Saying the train station neighborhood being the main trigger, obviously that's just a symptom. It shows that we're not dealing with the phenomenon of a substance being put in and something coming out at the other end. It's a far more complex psychosocial dynamic where a sort of image starts to crystallize and people start thinking, oh, it's due to that neighborhood. Of course, it's not due to a neighborhood. It's just a sort of collective opinion that has come about. This area magically pulls me in, and that's how the scene has grown over the years. Of course, it is due to a specific clientele with specific experiences that attracts them, and then they land there, and most of them never manage to get away from it again, and that's something we have to deal with. Does the EDH see it differently? Every bus in the US that is traveling at night, or that drives around at night to make sure crack consumers are taken to consumption rooms, we assess these consumers, and we often find quite different and differentiated reasoning as to why people consume and what it does to them. Rarely anyone ever says, oh, it's just started and I got stuck. People often quote the fact that they feel able to perform, they feel able to be more burdened, even if it doesn't last very long. But this is a situation or they're faced with a situation that they find difficult, and then they find something that makes them more positive. So it's a very conscious decision. They put themselves in a more able state consuming, be it traumatization from fleeing or from another traumatic experience in childhood or in the past. This helps them find a position or find a state where they feel more able to perform. It's not particularly caused by the area around the train station where it smells a certain way. Of course, there are trigger aspects, but that alone is not it. Yes, exactly. In my opinion, people don't die of the substances, but die of the prohibition. The substance doesn't make them a zombie or whatever. It is simply a chemical product which makes me feel better. It helps me survive because I had so much violence experience or trauma in my childhood, because we also have to keep living with memories in our head of what has happened to me. For many years, I only took heroin, only opioids, until I started substituting. And then I missed exactly that kick, this sudden, oh, I am myself again. Normally I'm not. That's how I feel, at least. Even to this day, I take a small dose of opioids. But I have to be honest, after a disease recently, I started using cannabis, and that has really helped me. And I have to say, good cannabis really helps my brain and my soul. It helps me get off as much opioids. And of course, my life is regular now. I have a great life, a great family, children, a job. All of this, however, would not have been possible had I not been supported sufficiently at some point. It's a shame that Daniel Daimel isn't here now, because he has some excellent experience from the Neumarkt Square in Cologne, where he asked users about the reasoning behind their consumption in North Rhine-Westphalia. Oftentimes, people documented that since this jump in crack cocaine started in 2020, and heroin addicts became crack addicts. So a big change in the consumption habits. So a new scene developed, and some of the members of the scene were interviewed. And people said they had experiences in war, they had to flee from dangerous countries. And this is the reason why they had to make themselves feel stronger. And they needed more than the previous opioids that helped them feels more strong. And this has caused, obviously, to a new scene, it all being criminalized. And those who previously consumed opioids finally or suddenly found a substance that helped them. They feel warm, they feel like they've arrived, they feel safe and looked after. And this was a result they reported themselves. And the previous substances didn't provide this feeling. And suddenly it was available everywhere. And that may be one reason why in North Rhine-Westphalia, at least in Cologne, one part of the scene developed like this. This seemed to really support the development of crack. So it is an exciting question. How can we use all this information, this collective experience, for the debate about stigmatizing people who take and use these substances? We all know how the media portrays users. We have a journalist from Frankfurt who we heard from. And I remember even 20 years ago in the ministry, we spoke about the fact that we need to address journalists. We need to explain why people take drugs. We needed to find a way to implement that knowledge or impart that knowledge to journalists, but no journalist showed. And don't you have a lot of contact with journalists? No, we can't rely just on journalists. Of course, it's about the media, but lots sells with the titles and the, clickbait titles like zombie drug. It's about pushing the clicks, it's about pushing the amount of papers sold. Positive stories that aim to create empathy don't sell. Furthermore, the belief that prohibition of drugs is done for support of health, to promote good health, obviously that's not true at all. People who use drugs simply become criminals and are considered criminals just by the fact that, due to the simple fact that they need something to help them. Analysts or certain forms of media that generates content, and Gabi does that wonderfully for us already, our press, and then myself as well. We talk about violence and crack addicts, the fact that they're so aggressive. Well, we also tend to contribute to a reproduction of this stigma. Okay, that's one target audience. Another one that I find even more problematic is the physicians. Actually, here I am. I actually just wanted to tell you very briefly that the terminology is an issue. I have noticed that myself too, that aggressivity is mentioned, desolate state, wretchedness. But these words are also reproduced by us in our circles. We ought to be more mindful about terminology. That won't be a magic bullet, but we do need to try and change the perception by using different words, and that can help reduce stigmatization. Another point I wanted to mention, also because what you said, not just about doctors, but psychiatrists and psychologists. What you said in Berlin was very interesting. You said you tried to reduce people's fears of psychiatrists and psychologists, and these fears are not, silly. They don't come from nowhere. Yes, so the psychiatrists who work there nowadays are such that if you have clients who consider psychiatry something that is enforced or forced upon them, then of course it is difficult to convince them that psychiatry or psychological treatment can help them. Lots of addicts have problems and experiences with not doing it right, of being fined, of being rejected, and vice versa. Psychiatrists and emergency doctors and nurses know how urgent these cases can be and how much aggressiveness they are often confronted with. And for them, it is also difficult to see the person suffering behind an aggressive behavior pattern. So it's important to develop a different way of seeing a situation. That works at times. We know who we have to approach. And I can imagine that in the near future things will happen and develop. But we do need a different image in the general population. Otherwise, we risk losing political partners. Politicians from the left-wing SPD party, center-left party, talk about drug users ought to be pushed out or to be kicked out, terminology like that. If someone is consuming and is being kicked out, they will just consume in the next entryway or alleyway. I can't believe terminology like this has become sort of common wording or acceptable, considered decent. We need to start doing without these kinds of terms so we stop reproducing the stigma, because I believe we do it ourselves too. Then we need to do some more careful press work and publicity work. Let me speak about my problem solution approach again, i.e. we have to work together, and it's high time we start doing that. May I briefly? Or did anyone else have a comment? Okay. Well, the question is not specifically about crack or the substance itself. The question is more about who takes these drugs. No one's asking why the general societal consumption of cocaine is growing. No one asks if politicians or athletes take cocaine or crack. It's more about the idea of people who are from a poorer milieu, who have to use consumption rooms for safe consumption. And I think that's a matter of anti-discrimination work that ought to be carried out. We have to be clear, more cocaine is being consumed in the general population. And there shouldn't be rules who's allowed and who's not allowed to consume these substances in society. I also believe that due to stigmatization, well, stigmatization even exists only because of criminalization. That's the biggest problem. Oftentimes, the stigma feels like a second disease. My father or both my parents were severe alcoholics, and I did, or for a long time, did the same thing as my parents. I just took a different substance compared to my parents. I can barely describe it. The politicians should be honest and really explain to people and get away from words like zombie drug. That's not even true. A lot of the illegal substances are able to medicate, especially opioids. What would health and pain therapy be without opioids? Lots of people would be ailing and suffering a lot. Some smart people said opioids are like a sticking plaster for the soul. And maybe that's what we should tell society, that opioids can help people as well. I think this is the consensus in this room and the consensus in this room. And the question is, how can we convey our certainties to the society at large? Maybe you as an academic could shed some light. No, I don't know. Not at all. I do. What about including addiction medicine into the medicine degree? Well, something we have started, similar to the Accept and German AIDS help organizations, two big agencies that were already mentioned here today, and lots of other organizations are part of them again. It's important that these are included, and they were founded in the past, and we try to use handouts to get a clearer idea or clearer view of what ought to be done to improve the situation, not to heal it. We've already spoke about that, but how to, improve the situation also in individual councils. Here today and in Berlin, and also this evening, we'll be able to talk about the activities 2.0. We need to talk to journalists and politicians. We need to figure out what the central challenge is and how to tackle it. Anti-stigmatization, that's an important point that matters for all of us. The way the media portrays or even executes this topic or abuses this topic. Bit of a bang in the audience, apparently. So these are topics that need to be addressed, and particularly in the political spectrum, they need to be discussed. There's a new format from Accept now, Drugs to Go, every last Wednesday in the month from 17 to 1800 hours. The new government will have a new drug commissioner, so we're starting from scratch again, but our terminology is "not with us!" exclamation mark. So we want to ensure that we're not going to start from scratch again. I'm sorry, it's old-dated, it's old-fashioned what we have and what we have been approached with, and we need to look forward, and we need to also set ourselves up in a bit of a more forward-facing, future-oriented manner. Instead of following the old terminology, the old cliches and terminology, let us try and address consumption in a German-wide manner, not in a sort of finicky manner in which we're only looking at one particular topic, like homelessness, addiction, wretchedness. Of course, these are consequences, but how can we try to reduce stigmatization? I do apologize. May I just add something to what Nina and Claudia have just said? Knowledge needs to be spread in society. It's not one addictive substance on the one hand that everyone uses, and that's fine, compared to these quote-unquote bad substances that are illegal. Drugs always are classed as bad and alarming. Of course, that's difficult, but there are also other ways to spread this information. And while you're already advertising an event, an Accept event, I'd like to advertise an event we're hosting here at the ISFF. It's free. No one needs to pay for anything, so anyone who lives here in and around Frankfurt on the 6th of December, please come one floor above here. Helena Babrock, a historian, will come and will talk about the history of drug prohibition, and we will also debate the consequences for social work, and possibly also debate how we can better convey this to the media. Now I'll lay out some flyers.
All right, that was the final word here. So thank you very much. Thank you very much for staying with us for the whole time. Anything else? Yes, of course. I'd like to thank all of our speakers here today. Thank you. Thank you very much for moderating this panel discussion as well. Most of you are already leaving now or getting ready to leave. So please stay in touch with us with the DAH, the German AIDS Relief Association, the addresses of all the speakers you've also got in your documents. So if you have any follow-up questions, please feel free to get in touch, especially if you want to find out more about Zurich, the situation there. Then you can also get in touch with Florian Mayer. He's also at the moment writing a dissertation about the project in Zurich. And please, may I remind you to complete the feedback form as well. I've been told we need a lot, we need the feedback really, also in preparation for the next conference which we're going to organize. But for now, I have to say thanks ever so much. Thank you very much for your interest and stay in touch with us, please.